The winner took the black sword, which, for the six that opposed him, each one by himself, he shut their mouths, swatted their noses, closed their eyes, and touched their chest without them ever touching, as the phrase goes, a hair on his head. The public raised their voices, and with common accord gave him the first prize, and another six prepared for lucha libre, wherein the young man gave the greatest show of his prowess, displayed his strong shoulders, his wide and very strong chest, and his arms, nerves, and muscles with which, and with incredible flexibility and skill, he forced the shoulders of his six opponents flat on the ground to their chagrin and sorrow. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Lysium. Today I want to talk about a book that I have never heard anyone talk about here, actually, but barely heard before I had found out about it. And rather, I'd only seen it mentioned once, and then I decided to read it. That was a while ago, actually. That was in 2023. When this translation came out, because this is a book by Migeul de Cervantes, who is most certainly famous for his early modern novel from Don Quixote, which is a very well-deserved distinction, giving him some grand titles about being one of the early modern novelists and so forth. And Don Quixote is a great quixotic adventure, to be a little circular there, but this, on the other hand, though, this book is not really well known at all. In fact, like I said, I never heard anyone mention it until I saw some scholar recommend this. It was not his publication, though. This came out in 2023. It is The Perils of Persiles and Sigismunda, a Northern Saga by Migeul de Cervantes. It's translated by William Thomas Little. He edited the story as well from the manuscripts, and he has an introduction, very, 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 very handy footnotes throughout. I can highly recommend this version, though I don't believe it's really that cheap. So I think that's maybe one problem with this book, is that it seems mostly to be in academia that the book is available. So, and that would then not help people read it, as you know, unless you're connected to academia, then you're not going to be reading the book. The book itself is, well, essentially as it is described, but that is a lot of things. It's a very broad thing. So I wanted to go over this real quick. First off, for example, some information, rather. The finishing touches were put to paper on this novel by Cervantes just a few days before he passed. And so it was published posthumously. Cervantes said that he wrote it in the style of the Aethiopica, of, about Theogenes and Theogenes and Chariclea, I should say, rather, in ancient Greek, which is by Heliodorus of Emesa. That is from about the 3rd century AD, so it's rather old, not very popular. At least I had never heard of it either, but I'm actually reading it now. This book was actually successful at its release in 1617, Cervantes having passed away in 1616, and it was considered an epic, essentially a Byzantine romance or a Greek novel, right? In a sense, though, Cervantes wrote it in a saga form, kind of like a novel. Sagas are they read a lot like novels anyways, if you've read the Icelandic sagas. But it was written as entertainment, essentially, right? Here is a quote from one scholar. It says, at its core, it is a travel story and a love story between two very attractive lovers, a prince from Iceland and a princess from a nearby island kingdom in the North Atlantic called Frislanda, who make an arduous and perilous 2-year journey by sea and land as pilgrims to Rome. Along the way, they encounter storms, pirates, death threats, imprisonment, kidnapping, sorcerers, poisoning kings, princesses, separations and reunions, and a diverse host of fascinating secondary characters who delight in telling their own stories. And that is a very succinct synopsis, but we can talk about that a little bit more. So essentially, the book starts with a man is set to be executed by barbarians, that's the words Cervantes uses, until a storm drowns his captives and sets him adrift. He survived the barbarians in the storm, but is then prisoner aboard a corsair ship headed by Arnaldo, a prince of exotic Denmark. Right, he learns that by speaking to a woman through a crack in the boards, this is Tarisia, a maid of Aristella. Aristella being one of our main characters, and Periandro is supposedly her brother and seeks to recover her. That is our other main character, Periandro. It's funny that his character's name means like something like very male, but shortly after his name is given, he puts on a dress actually, and apparently looks like a very beautiful woman. So interesting stuff to begin. Um, and then you actually may wonder then where are Persiles and Sigismunda? Well, such names are not actually confirmed to be characters that we know under different names essentially. In fact, these names don't even come up in the story till after page 100. So I think an astute reader can understand exactly who was who. And some of the characters are kind of figuring it out themselves as well. Anyways, that it's starting with northern barbarians then on their island, and then the story begins with much violence, right? There's also an interesting comment about a woman speaking Polish, which, according to a footnote, really just means any foreign language is described as Polish at the time, which may be from the influence of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which would have been a very influential, its largest country in Europe at the time, during Cervantes' time. So, the novel itself actually, in particular, takes place between 1557 and 1559. Which is actually before the union of Polish Lithuania. But anyway, so the story then proceeds in a rather interesting manner. While it does follow the woes of these northern travelers, we often hear stories of characters coming into the story that kind of work as vignettes and give the story an interesting pace, which is to say it's mostly just these other stories, a bunch of tangents, essentially. These tales are often interesting, and they can affect the main plot, but often they kind of just, while the characters are waiting around or where they were somewhere, they're hearing these stories, and the main plot moves along very quickly after said stories. But there are very large chunks of dialogue as well in this book. While some of it is quite noteworthy, I would say like very quotable. I assume that is William Little here doing a good job of translating. I found several turns of phrases like, "Wow, those are good. I'd like to see that somewhere else, use it myself." A lot of dialogue is very prolix. They're very big chunks of dialogue that go on and on and on, which is also a little typical of the time as well. But so Cervantes does throw in a good amount of references, besides the fact that it's based off a classical Greek work, and it is in the style of a Greek novel anyhow. There's lots of references to classics, like the Aeneid in particular is mentioned a lot, or referred to a lot, or alluded to a lot. And we also have knowledges of like heraldry and places from far off where Cervantes lived, right, in Spain. And so I learned that many of those around the Mediterranean actually, for example, believe that northern witches gained the aspect of the wolf during some of their nighttime routines. Cervantes also has this interesting habit of referring to Ireland and Hibernia, which are the exact same place. Ireland's just the English name, Hibernia is the Latin. The footnotes assure us this could be a mistake on Cervantes' part that other authors apparently at the time had made, or it could just be the device of Hendiadys, which I don't know. I'll assume Cervantes is a smart guy, and so we'll say it's that one. I also learned, for example, that the barnacle goose was thought to be hatched from barnacles, and so it could be considered fish and eaten during Lent, which is just great. So I think Cervantes also has a good sense of witticism and of language, which is not really surprising if you've read Don Quixote at all. But I do think the translator does a good job of retaining these, but also explaining footnotes that this isn't the original Spanish. He's keeping certain things. He changes certain small things if he has to. Though, if you also heard from the reason I chose the Black Sword bit is because I like black swords in my fiction. I read, be it The Broken Sword by Paul Anderson or Stormbringer from Michael Moorcock or Gurthane from J.R. Tolkien. There's a black sword in here. No, it's actually really not prominent in the story at all. But from that example, remember it said lucha libre, right? And so the author will do stuff like that. So it doesn't read in a lot of sense like a Northern Saga at all because it has this obviously Spanish influence in it. This is written in Spanish. I will say, actually, because you might be interested, a black sword was invented in Portugal in the 15th century. It was used by sailors and soldiers in ships and caravels. Portuguese soldiers called it a colhona, which is Sing for testicles or big balls, essentially, because one, a sword is a functional phallic symbol or device, and two, the terminal plates on the sword's handguard had two round drop-like shapes at each end. It was painted black to prevent rust by salt water and for camouflage so as to not reflect light on ships. So very cool. Not as epic as the stories you see in fantasy literature, but very cool nonetheless. But I think Cervantes, again, he does a good job with language, but also his creativity in the story is just interesting, and his own knowledge of art. And I think he crafts a fine story with characters that have varying beliefs and backgrounds, and many of them are not from Spain. I mean, we have characters from Portugal and Spain, and France and Italy. And there's like one section, for example, there's two lovers. A very short section. This is one of those, again, stories that these characters pop up and they're like, here's our story type of thing, right? This one's very short, unfortunately, because I really like their story, and it's Renato and Eusebia, and they're virgin lovers. It's just interesting. So again, we have part one, which is essentially Perils at Sea, and then you have part two, which has a more emotional distress than the physical at first. And it's, again, actually during this emotional distress we first hear the name Sigismunda attached to one of the previous characters with a different name, seemingly a false name. And it's a little later, actually, that Persiles is likewise mentioned. Remember, we don't really know what estate Periandro and Aristella, or what estate they are. Obviously, they're rich and beautiful, I guess, and where they come from, actually. And so while I actually mentioned that if you were paying attention at the beginning from the quote by said scholar, it's an interesting thing, actually, where one of them is from. I found it very fascinating. So that's actually where the map in the thumbnail comes from. But so we have pretty much a grand trip. We get from Scandinavia into the British Isles, France, Portugal, Spain, Provence, Italy, of course, and into Rome, which is the goal. But yeah, again, holy mackerel! Like every time you get a new character, you get another subplot or a flashback diversion. Essentially, the story goes on many tangents, constantly saying how beautiful and virtuous the women are. It's rather religious as well, which is not surprising. It's about a pilgrimage, and it was also written in the early 17th century. And it does have Cervantes does do a good job of showing us the foibles of men. And it does kind of slowly, in some sense, focus on a romance. Like, it is a romance novel. But it's definitely long-winded, I will say that. I mean, one thing you can tell that this is, well, not very long. There are actually a good many words per page, considering. And so it does drag a little bit, I would say, for a modern reader, probably. And even though the narrator literally acknowledges this, he literally turns to the reader and acknowledges all his tangents and stuff. And he apologizes, but he continues doing it anyways. What makes up for this, again, like I said, is a pretty consistent, lovely turn of phrase. Again, I assume little is captioned from Cervantes' original Castilian rather well. And there's the maps at the start, which are very interesting and from set time period, right? And figures like this. Again, in this version, I know in the original it is, well, it's not normally even called the Perils. It's normally called the Trials or whatever. So you might get different things in different translations. I'm not sure how easy or difficult the Spanish is, but it's, yeah, Los Traballos de Persiles y Sigismunda, the Travails of Persiles and Sigismunda, is the Spanish title at least. And so, again, the place that the one character is from that literally doesn't exist is very interesting, actually, and it shows kind of, even though this is the early modern period, just also like how the knowledge was still expanding then, just like it does now, right? And so how the North Atlantic, for example, was not as well mapped out as we would view it, right? And so you have maps with places that don't exist, phantom islands, I believe is what they're normally called these days. And so they're not on any modern map. And so just saying this is where the person exists, you actually really need to go to an old map to then get an idea of where supposedly this person would have been from. Very interesting experience, honestly. It's very, very fun. And again, I would just say highly recommend that the notes are very helpful. Very, very helpful. I very much appreciated the notes giving some background information. You see all these footnotes in here. That page is half footnotes. So it's overall, I want to say I'm very glad I read this. It was not my favorite story, as it definitely has like these tangents that aren't always the most entertaining. I mean, they do kind of add to the plot, mostly as a subplot. And it does come to a very kind of almost dramatic climax, and it's very terminal, to use Leiber's words. It ends very shortly after that, right? Once it climaxes, essentially. And there is no return journey, essentially. It just, you get the journey, things are revealed, everything is revealed pretty much that wasn't already, and everything's made clear, and you just have the end of the romance at that point, which is very fair for the style of the time, actually. But again, not a favorite though, but definitely not bad. Again, I think most modern readers maybe find it a little exhausting, but I would say for as far as 17th century novels go, my favorite is probably still Simplicius Simplicissimus by Grimmelshausen. But this is still worthy of a read, especially if you probably enjoyed Don Quixote by Cervantes, which is very different, but still, worthwhile. And I just wanted to let you all know about it, as again, I was not aware of it until 2023, right when this came out, and I bought it, and I didn't read it until now. But so anyone, if you're interested, go read it if you would like. If you have read it, let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching.